This is a brief tutorial on how to use the General Social Survey for online data analysis. I'm going to stick with very basic information on frequency distributions and cross-tabulations. I find the survey data archives at the University of California at Berkeley to be the most helpful and the easiest to use to analyze the GSS data. Here you see the URL for Berkeley's data archive. And if you follow that URL, it will take you here. This is Berkeley's website for the survey data archive. And you'll see here that they have a lot of potential websites. In addition to the GSS data, there's also American National Election Surveys, Cooperative Congressional Election Surveys, Survey of Consumer Finance, and census microdata. I'll talk about census microdata in a later tutorial. But to get to the General Social Survey, the best site to use is the SDA4 cumulative data file 1972 to 2018. And if you click on that, that will take you here, which is where you do your data analysis. This is an increasingly common platform for analyzing data online. I suspect that in the fairly near future, we will no longer need to download secondary data for analysis, but we'll be able to do it all online. Let's look at a couple of different approaches. Let's look at under personal concerns, something that concerns us all, health and happiness. There are several variables here: general happiness, happiness of marriage, condition of health, and is life exciting or dull. For the sake of ease, we're going to choose this general happiness. It is, I think, not an ideal measurement of this complex phenomenon of happiness. As you can see, it's a pretty simple breakdown: very happy, pretty happy, not too happy. To say that it doesn't capture everything about our emotional states, though, is not to say that it captures nothing. And as we'll see, it may be meaningful. If we want to look at that here, we can put that into the row by clicking on row. And then this is optimistic. About a third of the respondents reported that they were very happy. Majority said they were pretty happy, and only about 11.6% said they were not too happy. But let's do a simple cross-tabulation. Now let's think about something that might be connected to personal happiness. Let's look here at respondent background variables. Oh, personal information. Let's look at this. Let's look at marital status and whether marital status might be somehow connected to emotional states. I'm going to click on marital status, and then I'll put that in the column. The convention is that we normally think about the variable that we're considering as the predictor, or the thing that might influence the other variable, and we normally put it in the column. That's just a convention. You could also put it in the in the row. And by default, the GSS online gives us column statistics, which means that we'll be looking within the category of column, and we'll look at that in just a second here. Let's run that table. Well, it looks like this very rough measure of happiness does seem to be connected to marital status. If we look down the columns, about 40% of those who were married said that they were very happy, compared to about 25% of people who were widowed and 22% of people who were never married, and a little under 20% of people who were divorced, and only about 17% of people who were separated. Of course, that kind of makes sense. If you're separated, you're betwixt and between, you may be in a divorce fight, and so it's kind of understandable why these people would not be as happy. But we could also think about the fact that a correlation doesn't tell us the nature of a causal relationship. No, I actually don't agree with this common cliche that correlation is not causation. Correlation means that there isn't a particular causal relationship between variables, but if there's a real correlation, if it's not a purely accidental connection, then there's always some kind of complex causal relationship among two things. It may not be that one causes the other. It may be that a third thing causes both of them. Here, it is quite possible that the direction of causation works the other way. In other words, it's conceivable that happy people are more likely to be married, because being cheerful means that you're more likely to be a desirable marriage partner, and that's possible. Well, let's go back here and let's look again. You'll see here that there's something called a control. A control variable allows us to bring in another level. For example, we could control for relationship between marital status and happiness by controlling for sex, looking in other words at men and women separately. And the way that we would do that is here. We can click on sex and put that in as a control. Now let's look at what that looks like. This is only for men. If I remember correctly, it was about 40% of all people who were married were very happy. It's 39% for men and 42% for women. That's a slight difference, but I think not enough to make much out of. So it looks like it isn't the case that married men tended to be a lot more happy and that accounted for the relationship, or that married women tended to be a lot more happy and that accounted for the relationship. Now let's look at another part of this. Selection filter. Selection filter is essentially an if statement. That means only look at this relationship for controlling for the value of a variable. For example, we might want to look only, this is for 1972 to 2018, and it might be that things have changed over the years, and so we want to look at only the most recent data. So we could put year into the filter, and you'll notice that there are parentheses, and I'm going to put 2016, 2018 in there. And what that does is it excludes all years except for those most recent GSS years. And we'll run the table again. And even if we look at the most recent data, the results are not very much different. Here for 2016 to 18, 41% of men were very happy. 41% of married men were very happy. And about 40% of women were very happy. Okay. Well, let's look at, before we go, let's look at another relationship here. I'm going to take all of these out. And we might also be interested in people's political views. And if I remember correctly, we should be able to find those political views. Here, under voting patterns, and I'm going to go all the way down here and select this variable, poll views, which is the degree to which an individual thinks of herself or himself as liberal or conservative. Put that into the row. I can run that table. And including all years from 1972 to 2018, a little under 3% of Americans considered themselves extremely liberal, and about 3% of Americans considered themselves extremely conservative. Now, one of the questions we might want to ask is, did that change over time? Given that it's often reported that America became an increasingly polarized nation over the years. So we can look at a cross-tabulation between political views and year. I'm going to put that in the column. Now, the thing about year is that if I ran it like this, I'd get a different set. I'd get a different set of cells for every year, and so we would get all of these years from 1972 through 2018. What I'm going to do is I'm going to recode that to make it simpler, and I'm going to put it into 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And of course, this begins in 1972 and ends at 2018. And so those are the years that I'm going to have to take as my beginning and end. And I put in parenthesis, and then R means recode. A colon means do the following. And I'm going to call number 1 1972 until 1980. That is the 70s, essentially. And then I'm going to call 2. 2 is equal to 1981 to 1990. 3 is equal to 1991 to 2000. And 4 is equal to 2001 to 2018. And then I have to put in an end parenthesis to tell it that it's over. So if I've done that correctly, that should break all of those years down into just 4. And it looks like that I did do that correctly. And this is actually kind of interesting because if you look across the years, during the 70s, if you look at these extremes, about 2% of Americans said they were extremely liberal. By the 2000s, it was up to 4%. And then if you look at the other end, in the 1970s, close to 2.5% of Americans said they were extremely conservative. And by the 2000s, about 4% of Americans were extremely conservative. So that's not a big change, but it does look like there was a notable growth in the extremes from the 70s until the 2000s. Now, let's think about what kind of control might be interesting here. Let's look at political party affiliation as a control variable. Put that here in the control. What this means is that we'll get a separate table for each of the party identifications. And as you'll see, GSS includes more than just Republicans and Democrats. It also includes other, and it includes the strength of party affiliation. So let's run the table there. Now, what we're looking at here are just strong Democrats. Now, this is interesting because if we look at only at those who had a strong affiliation with the Democratic Party, those who were extremely liberal grew from only 3.5% in the 70s until 1 out of every 10 respondents by the 2000s. So we see a much more marked association at the level of strong party affiliation. And then we were not going to spend a lot of time on this, but if we look down at strong Republican affiliation, this is strong Republicans. Among strong Republicans, those who identified as extremely conservative grew from 8% to 15% by the 2000s. So this does support and is consistent with the idea that the party bases, those who were most strongly associated with political parties, did become more polarized over the course of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Well, that's a very basic introduction to the use of general social survey data. I'll follow this up by looking at how we analyze downloaded GSS data in an SPSS statistical package. I hope that you found that useful. And I'll be happy to discuss any questions that people may have.